Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Great benefits of protecting one's gaze. Number 1, the sweetness of Iman. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "The gaze is a poisonous arrow from the arrows of shaitan. Whoever leaves it out of fear for me, I will convert it into Iman, whose sweetness he will perceive in his heart." Narrated by Imam Hakim. Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah states, when the sweetness of Iman enters the heart, it will never leave it again. In this sweetness, there are glad tidings that one will leave this world with Iman. There are 5 benefits one attains when one gains the sweetness of Iman. Number 1, one attains enjoyment in his worship. Number 2, one gives preference to obedience over all other desires. Number 3, one bears all difficulties to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 4, one can swallow all bitterness in problems and difficulties. And number 5, one is pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decision in all conditions, i.e., one does not complain or object verbally or meditatively. Number 2, peace of mind. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah writes that by evil glancing, only sorrow is created. If a woman is ugly, looking at her makes an onlooker regret why he had looked at her. If she is attractive, he regrets as he cannot have her. Number 3, enjoyable life with one's wife. Shaitan beautifies the features of other women. The grass is always greener on the other side. When one looks at other women, one will not find much beauty in one's wife. But if one controls one's gaze, one's wife will be the most beautiful in one's gaze. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Do not fornicate, otherwise the enjoyment of your women will be snatched away." Number 4, family members will remain chaste. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Be chaste, your women will remain chaste. Be kind to your parents, your children will be kind to you." Number 5, acceptance of supplications. It is the experience of senior awliya that when a person is overcome with the desire to sin but restrains himself, then whatever supplication is made at that moment is readily accepted. Number 6, safety from sorrow on the day of judgment. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "Every eye will be crying on the day of judgment except the eye which was lowered from those things which are prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the eye which stayed awake in the path of Allah, and the eye which due to the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teared up the size of the head of a fly." Number 7, special proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sufiya mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very close to the broken-hearted. Due to lowering the gazes, the desires of the heart are certainly shattered, and this becomes the means of attaining a special proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that would not ordinarily be achieved by thousands of nawafil and adhkar. The harms of evil glancing and viewing pornography. Number 1, the sweetness of the acts of worship is removed by evil glancing. And then the inclination to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lessens until eventually these actions are abandoned. Thereafter, a dislike is created for them. Number 2, fights and problems at home. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, "If 2 people love one another, then a split occurs between them. This is because of a sin one of them has committed." Narrated by Imam Ahmad. Number 3, such a person is removed from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is cursed by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number 4, the darkness of evil glancing destroys the heart. This darkness is removed after a long period. The heart will not become cleansed except after protecting your gaze many times, and when there is an inclination to look, even the luster of the face is lost. Number 5, lustful gazes lead to inclination towards affection to love, and lastly love overpowers the thinking power and the intellect of the lover. Once the purpose of life has become the fulfillment of passions, he forgets the consequences of his actions and at times gets involved in illicit love affairs. This leads to disgrace, emotional upheaval, physical harassment, and even loss of life. A person can destroy his worldly life as well as the hereafter by these actions. Number 6, semen is lost in the form of nocturnal emission or worse, even masturbation or fornication. This causes the bladder to weaken, because of which drops of urine and precoital fluid drips continuously. This causes countless problems, confusion, and anxiety in the matter of purity. Number 7, when the brain is eroded by vices, the heart weakens as a result. Number 6. Semen is lost in the form of nocturnal emission, or even worse, masturbation or fornication. This causes the bladder to weaken, because of which drops of urine and precoital fluid drips continuously. This causes countless problems, confusion and anxiety in the matter of purity. Number 7. When the brain is eroded by vices, the heart weakens as a result. Physical and mental pains are spread all over the body, like backache, dizziness, sporadic blackouts, and even pain in the calves. This also ensues a whole host of medical complications like regular amnesia, insomnia, depression, frustration, unpredictable tempers, and many more asymptomatic maladies. Number 8. Blessings in a person's life and sustenance is removed. The cure and remedy for evil glancing is: number 1. Realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. When the thought or desire to look arises, then think to yourself, if at this time my teacher, elder or friend has to see me, will I venture to perform this action? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at me. How disrespectful, mean, insolent, unappreciative and audacious am I? By pondering over this, inshallah, one will be successful in redeeming oneself. Number 2. Realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. When the thought or desire to look arises, then think to yourself, if at this time my teacher, my elder or my friend has to see me, will I venture to perform this action? Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at me. How disrespectful, how mean, how insolent and how unappreciative and audacious am I? By pondering over this, inshallah, one will be successful in redeeming oneself. Taken from Anfas Isa. Number 2. Control yourself and seek forgiveness. By controlling yourself from gazing in a suggestively lustful manner, a light is created in your heart. By means of this light, the heart becomes cleansed of dirt and obscene thoughts. One should also seek forgiveness, however, this will not clean the heart as fast as when one controls oneself. Number 3. Visualize the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Punctually read the biographies of our pious elders. Take out some time in solitude to ponder over the warnings and the subsequent ensuing punishments to sinners. When one is inundated with the thoughts of sinning, he ought once again to visualize these thoughts. Inshallah, the desires will be subdued. If a slight inclination remains, then one ought to confront it with courage. Without courage, no strategy, however well devised, can be productive and beneficial. The most efficacious and effective remedy remains plucking up courage. Also think to oneself that on the day of judgment, I will be questioned about this evil action. Thereafter molten lead will be poured into my eyes, as is mentioned in a narration. At that time, how much difficulty and disgrace will I face?
शेख यूनुस साहब से एक शख्स ने कहा कि हजरत आंख कंट्रोल में नहीं रहती और गलत चीजें देख लेता हूँ, क्या करो? शेख यूनुस साहब से ये सोचो, ये कयामत की रोज यही आंख जहन्नम की आग में जलेगी। तो आंख में जब फायर जाएगा तो कितनी तकलीफ होगी। To think that this eye will burn in Jahannam by unlawful stares, how painful it will be. And inshallah, you will be able to control yourself. And he wrote back after some time, I said, Hazrat, I did that, and alhamdulillah, my eyes are now in control.
Think of the beautiful women of Jannah. For every gaze a person protects, he will be wedded to these women. It is the height of foolishness to deprive oneself of these beautiful women of Jannah due to taking haram enjoyment in the artificial beauty of this world. Number 4. Do not deliberately bring the thought of any beautiful form in your mind. If the thought comes by itself, there is no harm in the least bit. However, do not entertain the thought and allow it to take root in your heart. To repel this thought, think of a person who is blind, one-eyed, squint, lame, flat-nosed with thick lips, extremely worse looking, and with slime emerging from the nostrils and mouth. Inshallah, with this meditation, those seducing thoughts will be repelled instantly. If not transiently, then definitely there will ensue some decrease, since there is a logical maxim, النفس لا تتوجه إلى شيئين في آن واحد. the thoughts cannot be directed to two things at one time. The removal of luring thoughts is not completely required, since a person's reward increases when he engages in this struggle, this sacrifice. In short, if a person wants to save himself and garners all his courage and strength, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's aid and assistance will come to him. Gradually these thoughts will leave him, and even if they do not, the person will bear this difficulty with great ease. If, Allah forbid, a person is struck by some lifelong illness, he will be forced to bear all the way to a bitter end if necessary. If he is not happy to do so, then he should seek some other deity. Number 5. Ponder over the end result of your so-called beloved. When she dies, all her beauty will evaporate. Her beautiful face will mix with the soil. At that moment, no one will ever turn to look at her beauty anymore. This goes to confirm that her beauty was only temporary and fleeting. A few days after being placed in her grave, her body will decompose and become sand again. Insects will cover her, blood and pus will emerge from her nose and eyes. Since this is the condition which will afflict her one day, then it is necessary to take a lesson now. An intelligent person intending to commit any crime knows that if he is caught, he will be sent to jail. Even though he is not in jail now, he feels as though he is in jail at the moment, and thus abstains from the crime. This is called a deterrent measure. Similarly, one should keep in front of one's mind the condition of that female whose body will disintegrate and putrefy, with insects enveloping her body. By pondering over this for a short while, one will derive benefit. Inshallah, in a few days, one's attraction towards that person will begin to fade. Note: directly attempting to remove the thought of the beloved one will actually bring the thoughts of the beloved before one. This method is not beneficial. A certain disciple, murid, went to a sheikh, spiritual guide for self-reformation and spiritual upliftment. Perchance his gaze fell upon a female servant of the sheikh, and he began to take a fancy to her. Shaitan artificially embellished her charms in his mind and embedded the poisonous arrow of desire and passion into his heart. The female servant, on the other hand, was pious, upright soul, who immediately sensed the evil and dark nature of the disciple's gaze. The maid immediately reported the disciple's behavior to the sheikh, who devised a scheme whereby he hoped to rid the disciple of this lustful malady once and for all. He thus fed the maid servant food containing a laxative and commanded her to gather the feces in a separate bucket. After a few days of diarrhea and dehydration, her appearance became pathetic, her complexion pale, and her body was emaciated. The sheikh then sent her in the presence of the disciple, who, upon seeing her in such an abject state, turned his face away in disgust and disapproval. The sheikh appeared on the scene and, addressing the disciple, said to him, "O person, if you truly love her, why did you turn your face away from her now? She is still the same person with the same body. The only exception is this bucket of feces that has left her body. Your love for her has been extinguished by the unsightly defecation of this filth. It seems that your love was for this bucket of filth and not for her, or else you would not have turned your face away from her at all." The disciple was overcome with remorse and sincerely repented from this evil habit. Effective material remedies for spiritual maladies. Besides this, whilst engaging in dhikr, ponder that those besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have emerged from the heart, and the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has penetrated into the depths of the heart. By means of this, inshallah, one will even be saved from these non-volitional thoughts. Strengthening one's relationship with one's wife will also aid one. A point to note is that if there is a delay in being saved from these non-volitional thoughts, then one should not become perturbed, as this is not the aim. I have written it as a bonus. The main objective is to save oneself from sins which are within one's control, as has been mentioned above. If some difficulty is experienced on the body or soul while waiting for the results of the above medication, then one should bear it stoically. Number 6. The different limbs and strengths one possesses is a bounty and gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One should utilize them in only permissible avenues. When utilizing them in sinful avenues, there is fear that that bounty may be snatched away. An incident is mentioned of a youngster whose gaze fell onto a strange woman during tawaf. From the unseen, he was given a slap and he lost his sight. Today too, one can receive such a punishment. Number 7. Abstain from such places where it will be difficult to control one's gaze. Only go to such places when there is necessity and leave them once the necessity is fulfilled. Wudu is the weapon of the believer. Perform wudu, read 2 rakats of salah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for protection. After returning home, if errors have occurred, then seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Impose a penalty on oneself which will cause pain to the nafs. There is no sin for the desire to look, since this is not within one's control. However, practicing on the desire is within one's choice, and for this one will be held accountable. Fantasizing and intentionally looking are all included in acting on one's desire. The cure is to control the nafs and to lower the gaze, since this is within one's control. Adopt courage, even if one has to experience some difficulty. This difficulty is undoubtedly less than the difficulty of Jahannam. When this is done for some time, then one's inclination will reduce in intensity. This is the perfect remedy. There is no other cure, even if one remains distressed his whole life. Evil glancing is such an evil that it blackens, if not destroys, all the radiance of righteous deeds. Therefore, one should with great care endeavor to cure oneself. The desire to look is natural, therefore it is not evil. In fact, there are many benefits in looking at other people. However, practicing on the demands of this carnal desire is evil, and this is within one's control. Controlling oneself is also within one's control. Therefore, one cannot be excused for looking. Utilize your courage. This is the efficacious and effective cure. For a while there will be difficulty, but with the passage of time it will become one's habit, and finally one will experience enjoyment and delight in this and in the hereafter worlds. A person who lowers his gaze when the desire to look arises has been promised the sweetness of Iman. Together with this, a person will enjoy a natural sweetness as well. This is because when a person lowers his gaze, his innermost speaks out, "Wonderful, today you have defeated shaitan." The friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have expressed this type of happiness on these occasions, not out of pride, but as a means of expressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounty upon themselves. Such a type of happiness is commendable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ بِفَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَبِرَحْمَتِهِ فَبِذَلِكَ فَلْيَفْرَحُوا هُوَ خَيْرٌ مِمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. Say, with the grace of Allah and His mercy, then be happy. In lowering one's gaze, there is the preservation of one's internal and external life, since at times evil glancing leads to loss of one's life and iman. Number 2, intermingling of the sexes. Unrestricted intermingling of men and women was never regarded as correct. In the history of man, from the era of Adam alayhi salam till the era of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, men and women intermingling freely was never regarded as correct. This was not only for those who followed any sharia, but even the ordinary noble families never viewed it as correct and acceptable. Historical examples of no intermingling. In Tafsir Madarik, it is narrated that Nuh alayhi salam built the ark in 3 levels. On the uppermost level resided the humans. Adam alayhi salam's body was also taken on board. It was used as a separation between men and women. In the story of Musa alayhi salam on his journey to Madian, we find mention of the 2 women who were standing aside, waiting to give water to their goats. The reason mentioned for this is that those women did not like to mingle with the crowds of men. They would rather suffice and be content with the leftover water. Even before Islam, honorable women of all nations would remain segregated from men. Even amongst the ancient Arabs, despite the evil lifestyles and way of life, women would naturally conceal their faces from the prying gaze of strange men. In the narration of Tirmidhi, the manner of Zainab radiallahu anha sitting is mentioned, during whose nikah the first verses of hijab were revealed. However, even before these verses were revealed, she sat in the following manner, as is mentioned, and she sat facing the wall, and she sat facing towards the wall. The reason for that position is that so no man would stare at her, since this is natural shame found within women even without the laws of hijab. In noble Arab families, there was no informal intermingling and talking between men and women. From the above illustrations, we see that even before the revelation of the command of hijab, there was no custom allowing honorable and pious men and women to intermingle and speak informally and unrestrictedly. When reference is made to the first era of ignorance and the emergence of women in the Quran, this does not refer to noble Arab women, but to slave women and women from lower social classes. The noble Arab families regarded this as blameworthy. This is what the history of the Arabs testifies. The Quran and Sunnah forbid intermingling of the 2 sexes. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam enforced separation of men and women in various ways when women attended the masjid in the initial stages of Islam. Firstly, women stood at the back while the men stood in front. Secondly, men were requested to remain behind in the masjid for a short while after completion of the salah, so that the women would have sufficient time to reach home and avoid intermingling with men. Thirdly, a special door was assigned for the women to enter and leave. Fourthly, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam apportioned a different day and a separate gathering to teach the women. In addition, the Sahabiyat would walk on the sides of the roads to such an extent that their clothing would brush against the houses. This prevented them from coming into close proximity with men who would walk in the middle. Number 3. Conversing with members of the opposite gender. A person should not strike up casual conversations with members of the opposite sex. In fact, it is not even permissible for a young woman to greet a non-mahram man. If a person needs to speak to a member of the opposite sex due to some necessity, the speech should be straightforward and as brief as possible. In such a situation, the woman should ideally be behind a hijab or curtain. Any form of eye contact should be avoided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O wives of the messenger, you are not like other women because you have piety. Do not be soft in speech, lest he in whose heart is a disease of lust should be moved with desire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you ask them for anything, ask them from behind the curtain. This is purer for your hearts and their hearts. Some women nowadays have the courage to strike up a conversation with strange men almost as if it is their second nature. Other women raise their voices and speak vulgar words in the presence of their husbands, uncles, father-in-laws and other adults. Such behavior reveals a lack of modesty and shame. Number 4. Being in seclusion with a member of the opposite gender. A person is not permitted to be in seclusion with a member of opposite gender with which they can marry. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, abstain from being in seclusion with women by the oath of that being in whose control lies my life. No man secludes himself with a strange woman except that shaitan joins them. And it is better for a person to touch a swine which is messed in mud than to allow his shoulder to touch the shoulder of a strange woman. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is also reported to have said, no man is alone with a woman except that the third one present is shaitan, narrated by Imam Tirmidhi. In the context of travel, it should also be noted that it is not permissible for a man and woman to travel alone in a vehicle. Number 5. Physical contact with members of the opposite gender. A person is not permitted any physical contact with strange members of the opposite gender in the form of shaking hands, hugging, etc. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, it is better for a person to have a needle pierced into his head than to touch a woman who is not permissible for him. Aisha radiallahu anha also stated that the hands of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam never touched another woman besides his wives. He used to take the pledge of allegiance, the bay'ah, from strange women verbally when the need arose. Number 6. Interaction.
ये किताब क्योंकि साउथ अफ्रीका में लिखी है, साउथ अफ्रीका में सब बहुत है, because they are ahead of us. They've been in South Africa for maybe 150, 200 years. तो वहाँ तो बहुत फ्री मिक्सिंग है. अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह धीरे धीरे हिजाब भी है, लेकिन जो मिक्सिंग वाले हैं they do mix a lot. इसलिए कह रहे हैं कि don't shake hands with the opposite gender, don't hug them, don't kiss them. I went to Guyana, Jalsa. In Jalsa there were men and women. So in Jalsa there was this, mashallah, Molisa with big belly, and the women were coming around and he was hugging them. So I said to Ramzan, इनके रिश्तेदार हैं? नहीं रिश्तेदार नहीं, ये मनालय है ही ऐसा. ये तावीज़ पलीदा करता है, तो ये तावीज़ में औरतें इसके पास आती हैं, ये मुसाफा भी करता है, गले भी लग जाता है. अजीब है.
Number 6. Interaction with extended family and in-laws. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, guard yourselves from entering upon women. A Sahabi inquired, Ya Nabi Allah, what about the brother-in-law? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, the brother-in-law is like death. Narrated by Imam Bukhari. A person needs to observe gender separation and the laws of hijab from all strange members of the
brother-in-law is like death. Meaning, when a woman is married, her husband has a younger brother. Now, naturally, that younger brother is going to be a bit more healthier, smarter. So if she, talks to the younger brother, what we call dear in Gujarati. So then there could be some interaction, and then this one thing could lead to another. Right? So this is why Huzur said is yes, meaning you should be scared of it, like you're scared of dying, or it means it could lead to death, because uh, if you commit zina, then there will be stoning. So this is why Huzur said that it could lead to death. That's why don't be very free and joking and open and chatting with your brother-in-law. Be protective and be careful. Chaliye.
A person needs to observe gender separation and the laws of hijab from all strange members of the opposite sex. However, more care should be observed with spouses of uncles and aunts, brothers, brothers-in-laws, sister-in-laws, cousins, spouses, brothers, spouses, sisters, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunties, etc. The reason for this is that there is a greater possibility of a relationship between family members of opposite genders, as such distant relationships are rather informal. So no one may suspect anything immoral taking place between them during their countless regular interactions. In other words, the barriers preventing evil between them are relaxed. Many families have broken up because of laxity in following this religious command. A woman may occasionally expose her face, head, neck, forearms, and feet to mahram men. However, if there is any fear of evil or temptations arising between them, she is not permitted to do so.
Especially in this day and age. इस जमाने में फितना बहुत है ना, तो औरत को अपने महरम के सामने भी she shouldn't reveal her body. Brother, even uncle, even father, सबसे एहतियात करना चाहिए, because times are really bad. ये कह रहे हैं. चलिए.
Nowadays, there is a remarkable increase of incest cases. Thus, more precaution has to be exercised with the type of clothing one wears, even at home, before one's siblings and relatives. Number 7.
ये बहुत कंप्लेन आ रही है. औरतें जो हैं, ये टाइट लेगिंग पहनती हैं, इतना छोटा छोटा ब्लाउज पहनती हैं, और वो जेंट्स की तरह से वो क्या टी शर्ट पहनती हैं और घर में घूमती रहती हैं. हालांकि उनके भाई हैं, ये हैं, कभी दूसरे रिश्तेदार भी आ जाते हैं, फादर इन लॉ आ जाते हैं, ऐसे मेरा महरम ही है ना. तो ये बेशर्मी है. औरतों को घरों में भी सही लिबास पहनना चाहिए, क्योंकि दूसरे बच्चे भी हैं, तो बच्चों के सामने भी एहतियात करना चाहिए. चलिए.
Number 7. Permission to enter private quarters. The Quran prohibits entry into the homes of others without seeking the necessary permission. Also, entry of immature children into the private quarters of a married couple is dependent upon the latter's permission at times before Fajr, at midday, and after Isha. Children who have reached the age of maturity should seek permission at all times before entering. One of the reasons,
before you enter their private room, bedroom or private room, knock, wait, take permission, then enter your parents' rooms. Don't just barge in there. Though you're living in the house, but you are mature now, so you should be careful in entering the private rooms of your parents. Chaliye.
one of the reasons for these laws is that the gaze and presence of the intruder may violate the chastity, honor, and dignity of the females. Strange men should not be permitted to barge their way through the privacy of women. Men who are in the habit of entering the bedrooms, private quarters, or areas where women are gathered should be barred from doing so. In fact, in a hadith, Rasulullah is reported to have said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not look with mercy at 3 people on the day of judgment. The one who is disobedient to his parents, the woman who imitates a man, and the cuckold. Another narration states that these 3 will not enter Jannah. A cuckold is a man who does not mind other strange men visiting his wife. The protective jealousy of men over their female members, ghaira.
We live in this country, these people, they have no haya, no sharaf. There was this article about masturbation, and this young boy said he's been masturbating since he was 7, 8, 9. And because when his mother used to have bath, she would come out of the bath naked and sit in front of the heater to warm herself up. And he would see her mother and he would feel attracted towards his mother. And then he started masturbating. So his mother should have been careful as well. That's what, because even if your child is 6, 7, 8, but they understand everything. So how can you remain naked or unclothed in front of them. तो इसलिए ये बहुत जरूरी है ये जो कह रहे हैं एहतियाती precautions. In this day and age, it's more. We have to be more careful because of the fitna that surround us. जी.
غيرة. Sa'd bin Ubadah radiallahu anhu said, if I were to see a man with my wife, I would strike him with a sword and not with the flat side of it. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard this, he said, are you surprised at Sa'd's ghayra, Sa'd's self-honor? By Allah, I have more ghayra, I have more self-honor than Sa'd, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more self-honor than I have. Narrated by Imam Bukhari. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said, I possess self-honor, ghayra, and Ibrahim possesses self-honor. Whichever man does not possess self-honor and ghayra, his heart is upturned. It was narrated that when the rebels entered the presence of Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anh, his wife Naila spread her hair out as she was entreating the chivalry of the rebels. Thereupon Uthman radiallahu anh shouted at her and said, cover yourself, by Allah, death is easier for me than the violation of the sanctity of your hair. Therefore, the husband's protective jealousy over his wife motivates him to protect and safeguard her from anything that might harm her honor or disrespect her dignity. Incidents that were motivated by manly zeal and ghayra.
One is haya, the other is ghayra. Haya is modesty, chastity, and ghayra is self-honor. Ghayra is from ghayr. Ghayr means other person. If the other person stares at your mother or your sister or your wife or any of your other relatives, then you get angry and say, hey, who is staring at? Right? So this is called ghayra. You don't want someone to stare at your household members with lust. That's ghayr. Ghayr, looking at your thing, is called ghayra. So ghayrat means self-honor, self-respect. You have that ghayrat in you, self-honor. You don't want anyone to do anything bad to those whom you love. Now this ghayrat, Nabi Pak sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Sa'd ibn Ubadah said, if I saw someone fornicating with my wife, I wouldn't go out to search for 4 witnesses and call them, come here and see what he's doing to my wife. I would just pull the sword out and finish him off. Nabi Pak sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, this is because he has ghayrah in him. And Huzur said, I have more ghayrah than him. I have more self-respect and self-honor. And Allah has more self-honor and self-respect. And this is why Allah made fawahish haram, all indecent acts, zina, sharab, liwatat. These acts, Allah said, these are haram. Don't go near them. Because Allah hates it. That, oh Muslim, you are mine. And you are running away from me. And you are disobeying my command. You're going to these indecencies. This is why ghayrat should be within a person. Haya is in women and ghayrat is in men. Now if women lose their modesty and haya and men lose their ghayrat, the society is gone. And in the society we live in, that's what happened. After World War II, when these soldiers were out fighting Hitler and everywhere, their women were fornicating because they couldn't control themselves. And this is how zina and fornication spread in them. And then the children that were born were illegitimate. And then when they grew up, they committed more zina and more illegitimate children and more harami children. So the country is now filled with harami children. And this is where all the fasad and corruption comes from. So they've lost their haya, they lost the ghayrat. When women lose haya and men lose ghayrat, then the society is finished. This is why Hazrat is talking about ghayrat now. Clear?
Incidents that were motivated by ghayra, by manly zeal. Narrating the events of the year 286 Hijri, Hafid ibn Kathir rahimahullah quoted what was mentioned in Muntazam. From the wonders that occurred during that year, a woman sued her husband before the judge of Ray, a city in modern-day Iran. She claimed that she had 500 dinars as a deferred portion of her dowry, but her husband denied this. She managed to get proof to support her plea. She was then told that she had to uncover her face in order to make sure that she was the wife. When this was insisted upon, the husband became jealous and said, "Do not uncover her face, she is truthful in her claim." He confessed that her claim was true in order to avoid other people seeing his wife's face. When the wife realized that what had happened and that he had confessed so that others would not see her face, she said, "I absolve him of the deferred portion of my dowry in this world and in the hereafter." Hafiz Sam'ani rahimahullah
You
added,
understand the case? The case, woman with maid, क्या कहा था? 500 dinars on him. So the case went to the court, and the court, Qazi said, okay, the judges are here, but I need to see the face, and the witnesses need to see the face of the woman. So she has to open her face and shows her face in the court, and this is allowed. In Sharia, if you are in front of a Qazi and he needs to check the ID, then the woman has to open her, reveal her face before the Qazi so he can give the proper judgment. So it was legally, Sharia wise, it was okay. But as soon as Qazi said that she has to open her face before the two witnesses so they can determine this is the person who is putting the case and I can decide. The husband said, no. The 500 is hers and leave it with her. She is right. I don't want her to open her face before anyone. That's the husband's ghairat. He didn't want anybody to see the face of his wife. Now, upon this, the wife also said, if he's saying this, then I absolve him on his duty. There is nothing on him. Finish. Case closed. And they left without, judgment. They said, we don't want to go ahead with this case. So this shows the ghairat of men. Ibn al-Jawzi mentioned this. Chaliye.
Hafiz Sam'ani rahimahullah added in his Al-Ansab, having admired their jealousy, the judge said, "This incident is to be added to the historical record of noble manners." While Muslims live by and enjoy these feelings of jealousy and ghaira, manly zeal, chivalry in their societies, which elevates their ranks way above the stars and raises them to the most sublime ranks in virtue and purity, non-Muslim societies in the East and West experience the life of cuckolds, filth and impurities.
Cuckold का ये तर्जुमा है दयूस का. दयूस. Hadith में है दयूस الذي يقر في أهله الخبث. One who approves khabasat in his family. Meaning his family is doing some khabith harkat with someone and he is okay with it. That person is called the youth. Meaning his wife or his daughter is dressing immodestly, or he knows that they are committing zina, they're sleeping with other men, and he still says, oh, it's all right, what's wrong with it? Let them do it if they want to. Then this person is called the youth. And Hadith says that the youth will not enter Jannah. Chaliye.
Indeed, some animals would refuse to experience such a life. Some male animals get jealous over their females, and in order to protect her, the male fights one another, sometimes to the death, until the strongest of them finally wins. How truthful our prominent scholars were when they
Even
said,
lion ki lioness hoti hai. So if another lion comes and tries to touch his lioness, the lion will fight and kill the other one. तो लायन में भी गैरत है. तो जानवरों में भी ये फीलिंग है कि हमारा जो कांटेक्ट है उसके साथ किसी और का नहीं होना चाहिए. चलिए.
how truthful our prominent scholars were when they said, every nation whose men have weak manly zeal, men have weak ghaira, its women do not properly maintain their chastity. Number 8, separating beds of children. Parents are commanded in the hadith to separate beds of children at the age of 10. Amr bin Shu'aib radiallahu anhu narrates from his father, from his grandfather, that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, command your children to perform salah when they are 7 years old, punish them for not doing so when they are 10 years old, and separate their beds. The separation of the beds of children as they grow up is in order to preserve their purity and prevent them from engaging in any indecent behavior. In recent times, there have been numerous cases of young boys saying that they have been attracted to their sisters because of the latter's improper dressing and their close physical proximity to them. Rules regarding women especially. Number 1. Rules regarding, yeah.
58 हो गए. ओके भाई, तैयारी कर लो तुम्हारी। सुलेमान सो गया, उसको जगा दो। चलिए, चौहान भी सो गए। चलो, बच्चों को बेचारों को नींद हो जाती है। सुभान अल्लाह भी हम